All right. That didn't work.
Oh,
That didn't work. Sorry, I'm having some technical issues. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stigma-Free Society's Facebook Live event. My name is Gerry Friesen, also known as the Recovering Farmer. I am a stress and conflict management specialist working out of Manitoba. Because of my own journey with mental illness, I have a real passion in talking about it because it is in talking to others we can find a path forward for ourselves. You can learn more about me by visiting gerryfriesen.ca. Through this Facebook Live event, I am representing the Stigma Free Society, which is a Canadian registered charity that aims to reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. This event is part of the Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, an online community-based mental health program that creates access to mental health education and peer support training, as well as practical and relatable resources for those living in rural and agricultural communities. You can find the toolkit at ruralmentalwellness.com. I'm excited today to have the opportunity to chat with Brooke Hayes. Hi, Brooke.
hi, nice to see
Uh,
you.
I'm talking to Brooke. She's on Vancouver Island. And just out of curiosity, it's frigidly cold here where I am, Brooke. What's the temperature in Victoria today?
It's about 8 degrees, I
Oh,
think. Our snow has just melted. We're just the tiny little piles from our big snowfall a couple of weeks ago. So,
wow. And I shouldn't complain because we've had lots of snow this winter,
yeah.
and that's something, of course, that farmers are really looking for. So before we jump into the questions, Brooke, I'm going to just quickly read a short bio on you. Brooke is a graduate student at the University of Victoria, where she is pursuing a PhD in environmental studies. Brooke is actively investigating the connections between soil quality and farmers' health and is working with farmers and academics across the country to explore this relationship as a form of adaptation and resilience in the face of climate change. With 20 years of experience working for the provincial public sector, Brooke brings a strong policy and practice lens to her current role as chair of the National Farmers Union Mental Health Working Group. So, again, welcome, Brooke. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know certainly climate, and may I refer to them as climate crises at this
Mhm.
point, had a huge impact on farmers from coast to coast last year. So it's going to be an interesting topic. But before we jump into that, can you just start off by telling us what got you into the areas of research you're focusing on for your PhD?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction and also for the invitation to be here today. It's obviously a subject that's very close to my heart, and so I'm really happy to have a chance to talk about it. And I would say that I took the long way to this subject. I have sort of a career archipelago that goes out into many, many, many different subjects. And it was a little bit by chance that I landed in the field of agriculture, having spent time as a biochemist and working in ministries like oil and gas and transportation and children and family development and procurement. So all sorts of different subjects. And when I landed in the Ministry of Agriculture a couple of years ago, I realized that all of my interests intersected in this subject. You know, that agriculture was the thing that actually connected health and environment and transportation and family and community development and economic development, trade and labor. It had so much within that one subject that I realized I had a lifetime of learning ahead of me. And I got really, really excited because the portfolio I had all of the things that I was really interested in. It had climate change, both from an adaptation and mitigation perspective. I had the file responsible for soil, air, and water quality, and all of the aspects of improving our soil, air, and water quality, land use planning, land use inventory, innovation, marketing, export development, beneficial management practices. I had it all. I mean, I had a huge portfolio with all of the right things to make it happen. And I got completely drawn into the subject of, you know, soil quality and farmers' health. And I realized that, government, if I learned anything in my time in government, is that things can take a long time to move forward. And even with all the right people and all the right intentions, it's just not easy to make progress in a system that's designed to take this to the center of subjects rather than work across systems. So I was completely passionate about this subject of soil quality and farmers' health, and I realized that in the ministry, at least as far as I could tell, and mostly across the rest of government, we were seeing farmers primarily as an economic entity. When we were thinking about policies, when we were thinking about how to make adjustments to support farmers, we were really only talking about their economic success and viability. And I just felt like we were missing some really important aspects of farmers' health in terms of their mental health and all of these challenges they're facing from across the board, from everything from extreme events, as you've just said, these climate crises, and BC has had its fair share, to increasing costs of doing business, to increasing consumer demands for cheaper food, to the globalization of food and all the stresses that come with working in that environment. I realized that I needed to go deeper in this subject, that getting a half an hour to talk about it with a small team who were off doing the really interesting work just wasn't going to do it for me. So I stepped back and I decided to get a bit closer to the work and actually not wait for government to sort it out, because I realized their timelines were just not going to work for me. And so I decided to go out and do the work directly. So I am opening up a conversation about the broader connections between soil quality and farmers' health, with the idea that we should care about the health of our farmers, and that maybe we can think about adaptation to climate change in a more than economic sense, that we can start to think about some of the potential benefits of improving soil quality and its ability to also support farmers' health and community health and other aspects as well. So
well, and you know what? As our viewers can tell, you have passion. I appreciate that. Our viewers should know that I virtually met Brooke last fall, I believe it was.
yeah, I think
She's
so.
been involved in some projects, or a project that I've been involved in here in Manitoba, and certainly I love that passion. And what really intrigued me, Brooke, is when you talk about that connection between soil health and farmers' mental health.
Yeah.
I'd never
Yeah.
thought of it that way. And
Yeah.
so talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've just come back from some of my field work. So I was out visiting 36 farms across Vancouver Island this last summer. And I asked every single one of them when I met them, do you think that there's a connection between soil quality and your health? And the answer was almost universally yes. But the answer that they had was that it was related to the nutritional quality of the food that they were producing when they had high quality soil, which I think most people will feel like there's a pretty well established body of knowledge around that. Better soil quality, you get better micronutrients, you get better, diversity,
Right.
it just tastes better. There's that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But my belief is that actually soil biology plays a big role in farmers' mental health in the same way that gut health, right, in humans is protective against all kinds of,
Right.
chronic diseases.
Yeah.
So farmers, as we know, are out there, they've got their hands in the soil, it's all over everything, it's all over the food that they're producing. And I believe that a rich biological system on the farmer is actually going to offer them some protection for mental health and other chronic issues if they have high soil quality. So conversely, farmers that have degraded their soil quality because of the demands put upon them through our current systems, they've used the everything ending in acide, right, that is killing things, pesticide, herbicides, and fertilizers, which are salts, are going to be having less biology in their soil. And that as we improve the quality of the biology of our soil, we may actually improve the biology of our farmers as well, and the food they're producing, and therefore the consumers as well. So
Yeah.
that's
No,
a
that
line
makes so
before
much
I,
sense. And
yeah,
really, I wasn't a grain farmer, I was a livestock producer, a hog producer actually, but so that same concept would work there as well. When my production is going well in the barn,
yeah,
my mental health is better. Absolutely.
yeah, for
And
sure.
if I think about what just happened in BC with their what was that called? The rain.
Oh, the atmospheric river.
The atmospheric river. Sorry, I forgot. And so there was a lot of livestock production that was affected by that, and
Yeah.
so that would have that same effect there. That's really intriguing. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And along with all of this, of course, and we mentioned briefly climate crises.
Yeah.
And when I look at, and I know in Ontario they had, a lot of rain when they were trying to take their crop off. And on Prince Edward Island, they've had the issue with potato exports. On the prairies, there was a drought this last summer.
Yeah.
BC had what we
Fires
just
and
talked
floods.
about. I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I feel myself getting anxious just talking about
Exactly.
all these events. But so it creates an anxiety in farmers.
Hmm.
And so what role does that climate anxiety create for farmers?
Yeah. Well, and I think I want to actually circle back to something you just said about when you felt like your operations were going well, then you were feeling good as well.
Right,
And so when I'm thinking about farmers' health, I'm not thinking about it from a clinical practitioner perspective. Like I'm not a doctor, but
right.
I am curious about optimism, right? And a sense of control and agency over, that you feel like you have control over the success of what's happening on the farm. Climate can sometimes take that away from us when we feel like we're subject to it. I'm also curious about relationship networks. And I think what's interesting is that what I've got from my early results from a survey that I've done is that we do see that optimism does increase when farmers do have feelings of control over their
Yeah,
farm
yeah,
success. We also see that I find this quite interesting that profitability is associated with optimism. So there is actually something we can actually see. If farmers are profitable, they are more optimistic, but even profitable farmers are struggling.
yeah.
So there is still an anxiety in that population that we have to recognize is real. Also, you might be interested to know males are slightly more optimistic than females. Apparently,
Slightly
slightly
more?
more
Oh, that
optimistic.
surprises me.
I
Okay.
know. I thought you'd be have it's I find that interesting. I'm not sure what's driving that, but it is visible in the
Yeah,
data. And also, it wouldn't be surprising potentially that young farmers are the most optimistic of our
yeah.
farmers in the population, and that tends to decline over time. So, you asked what role does anxiety play in the lives of farmers, and I think there's a multi-storied answer to this, and it's grounded in the truth that farmers are resilient by nature, right? And they have been asked to innovate and adapt for 10,000 years. This isn't new. And I really believe that, every farmer is effectively the CEO of a mid-sized company, right? They are managing so many different things. They're part biologist and part marketer and part veterinarian and part environmentalist and part, climatologist. And there's so many different things, and they're innovative and they have a history of adaptation. As you said, it's been a really tough year. In BC, we've seen it specifically, but also across the rest of the country. And I think that the costs to farmers are in terms of their ability to make decisions on the farm. And as I was talking before, climate is just one factor that are affecting farmers in terms of their ability to be resilient in the face of these pressures. So, in the face of these complex systemic pressures, I think it's really important to acknowledge that most of our farmers are actually operating alone. And so climate anxiety is different when you face it alone. And it's interesting. I asked in my survey what relationships farmers would rely on if they wanted to make a change in their practice to adapt to climate change. So who would they talk to? Who would they rely on for that information? And so can you guess, who they would most rely on?
Tell
No?
me. No.
Other farmers.
Yeah. Okay.
So they relied on other farmers and scientists together combined 10 times more often than they would on government resources. So I think, this is pointing us in a direction of when we're thinking about climate anxiety and we're thinking about supports that might be, helpful, that we need to be thinking about how do we support our community of farmers, because that's really a source of strength and knowledge and innovation that will allow for this sort of adaptation to happen. I don't know how it is in the rest of the country, but in BC, at least in the 90s, we saw a complete fracturing of extension services. They were almost completely wiped out across the board. So we lost our research centers, or most of our research centers. We lost most of our on-the-ground supports for farmers. And so I feel like, there's a combination of factors here that has really separated farmers from the systems of, from the people that are consuming their food. So we've got, a real divide in terms of, people don't know where their food comes from. They don't know how it was produced. They don't know who's producing it. And in that survey that I mentioned, we found that farmers who sell their products closer to home are showing signs of more optimism. So the more profitable they feel they are. So I find that quite interesting, that there's something about community connection and connection to food that really changes how anxiety manifests at a farm level.
Yeah. Well, in that anxiety piece, and you mentioned anxiety, you mentioned things in the farmer's control. So what I gather from that very often is unknowns are things that really create anxiety, right? And
Yeah.
unknowns and things we can't control. Well, obviously we can't control the weather.
No.
And this isn't the big picture climate change. This is just talking about weather. So there's that. There's the unknown of I put in a crop in spring and I really don't know what I'm going to harvest. Number one. Number
Mm-hmm.
two is I don't know what I'm going to get paid for that.
Yep.
But what I found really interesting is when you talk about who would farmers talk to in regards to climate
Yeah.
anxiety is other farmers.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge I've thrown out so often to farmers is when you're feeling anxiety, the stress of farming, when your mental health is suffering, talk to other farmers, right? Because you're
Yeah.
not alone. And it's
That's right.
interesting how many times I've been told, well, I thought I was the only one going through this, right? So I find it
Exactly.
intriguing when you talk about the fact that
Yeah.
farmers will talk to other farmers when it comes to climate anxiety.
There was a good number of them who said they would only rely on their own judgment as well. So I think they exist there as well. Um, but no, I think you're right. And what you were just saying in terms of, climate kind of throws your planning out the window, right? These extreme events take best laid plans and ideas about what you might have been able to accomplish that year and can potentially throw them out the window. I think it's not just on the crops as well. Like there's related impacts to our supply chains. I've heard from a lot of farmers that are quite concerned about climate, not just from a what they're going to be able to grow and if their soil is going to be able to hold enough water and those sorts of infrastructure questions and production questions, but it's also about whether or not they can get the equipment in they need, whether or not
Yeah.
they'll be able to ship their products out.
Yeah.
And our supply chains are 100% affected by our climate events. We are connected to a global supply chain, and these supply chains are designed for efficiency. They are designed for large scale. They are not designed for small scale producers. And so small scale producers are often on the hook for trying to figure out, how am I going to get, chicks for my broiler operation, or, how am I going to get that piece of equipment that I need to move to no-till, for example. They have to work with what they have, and in that case is often the community that comes together to respond to those situations. We saw that a lot with farmers markets.
Yeah.
This year there was a huge outpouring of support and interest in farmers markets from our local communities when they realized that our food systems are far more fragile than we thought.
Yeah, and there's another piece that you talked a little bit about that I just wanted to highlight too, and that is how farming has changed. What the decisions farmers have to make
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Farming. And the other piece that you talk about is that you view farmers as being CEOs of their own companies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in my generation going back, farming used to be quite a bit simpler, and it
Mm,
was much more a way of life, right?
right.
But that transition has happened, and as younger generations take over,
Yeah.
it's much more of a business now, and these business
Right.
decisions have to be made, which creates an anxiety in itself.
For sure. I'd love to comment on that because I think it's really relevant to the state of farmers' mental health and responding to climate and adaptation and making sure we have secure and robust food systems in the future. In 1931, we have some data about the number of people
I'm
in
not
Canada that
that
were
old.
farmers. Oh,
I'm,
sorry. I'm going to take us through time. So,
okay.
1931, guess out of 100 people in Canada, how many of them were farmers?
Sorry, say that again.
Out of 100 people in Canada in
Oh, I
1931,
just read
how
this
many
the
of them
other
were
day.
farmers?
I can't remember.
It's 30. So
30.
30%
Yeah,
of
30%.
people in Canada. So 1 in 3 of us were farmers in 1931.
Yeah.
In 1951, what percent was it?
Tell
Any
me.
number. Any number.
If it was 30, then probably 51. It might have actually gone up a little bit.
It was down to 7%.
It was down to 7.
7%. So only 7 out of 100 Canadians in
20
1951 were
years.
farmers.
Wow.
In 20 years. Because, of course, coming out of the Second World War and with the introduction of fertilizers and a huge push to get people off the farm, we saw a massive social shift away from farming. And we lost touch with our farmers as a community at that time. Guess what it is today?
I don't know. I was so wrong before. Tell me.
It's 1.8%.
1.8% today of Canada's population are
Of
farmers.
farmers.
And it was 30% in 1930.
Correct.
Wow.
So we have had a massive social change that has affected how we interact with our food as part of our culture, food as part of our community. And I think we've really, in the process, if I may say so, my belief is we've devalued our food and our farmers.
Yeah.
We have really put farmers in a position where in BC, we have the oldest and the poorest farmers in Canada. So almost half of the farmers, 17,000 plus farmers in BC, make less than $10,000 a year. And because of that, they have to take on other jobs. That's just required. And I think as a society, we care about our food. When I look at social media, when I look at the news, when I look at my communities, when I look at my own life, I care about food. I know people in my life care about food. But we don't really seem to have that relationship with our farmers anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of like and we see that, extended issues with that extended across multiple systems. And restoring that connection, I think, is a really important part of, reducing some of the climate anxiety, supporting the mental health of our farmers, building community resilience beyond just farmers. These are people making decisions about what happens on the soil. These are people making decisions about, biodiversity and about, ecosystems. And I think we really do need to be paying attention to their mental health to make sure that they feel like we care and they know that we care about their interest in doing the right thing and support them. And our policy environment really isn't thinking about the small, farmers, small community farmers. So that's another whole line of inquiry to talk about.
That's another whole hour.
That's
later,
a whole nother.
right?
We're just touching on a few important points today.
Yeah. Well, and you've kind of touched on this, Brooke, but just kind of in a short snippet, obviously everybody can see you're passionate about what you do, and I love that. What drives that passion?
Yeah. Well, I actually, you might be surprised hearing all these horrible things, that I'm absolutely an optimist. The thing that drove my passion into this subject is the solution that has been identified that we can put carbon in the soil. And that there's this win-win-win solution that is right in front of us. And many people are talking about it and recognizing it and moving towards it. And I think it's absolutely critical that as a society, we understand that we can actually capture a tremendous amount of carbon in our soils, in our agricultural soils specifically. And we've lost a lot of that carbon through our conventional farming practices. So when we return what we call organic matter back to the soil, which is 58% carbon always, because it's organic. Like, we are carbon-based materials, right? Anything that was living that we put back in the soil has carbon in it. When we can feed that biological system, we are capturing carbon in the soil. And when we capture carbon in the soil, we increase its water holding capacity, we increase its ability to manage extremes in temperatures, we increase the yield, the nutritional content of the food coming out of it. And what I'm hoping that my research will prove is that we're also increasing the mental health of our farmers. So that's really where I feel like, we have this powerful solution that the entire world can get behind. This is not just a BC solution. This is not a technical solution. This doesn't require us to invest in some new equipment. It requires us to do a better job of making our own compost and doing better jobs with our own waste products on the farm, and just allowing for natural systems to do what they're designed to do, to move away from a command and control model and actually helps ecosystems do what they're meant to do. So I really believe there's huge potential and power in this solution, that we can actually both mitigate some of the climate change, some of the carbon that's being released into the atmosphere, and other greenhouse gases. Methane is a really important greenhouse gas that I just learned. There are these bacteria in the soil that actually they'll eat methane, and they're found more commonly in pastures that are grazed by livestock. So we're actually getting, methane taken out of the air in livestock grazed pasture land. So there are tremendous potential and power, and I really feel like all of the challenges that I've just mentioned, we can make a very significant positive impact on if we're able to actually convince the rest of society to care about the way our food is being produced, and to reconnect people to the places where it's grown, to the farmers that are producing that food, and that we reward good behavior, and we start to see farming as critical to our society's functioning and to our ecological resilience as a whole. So,
Oh, perfect. So tell me, Brooke, and we're reaching the end of half hour. I told you it would go by quick.
I
There's so
did.
many other things I'd like to
I
touch on,
know.
but to kind of wrap up, how can farmers take steps to improve their overall health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I feel is such an important question, and it's actually one I don't totally feel qualified to answer. Um, I think that probably the best advice I can offer is to say that there are a huge amount of resources. There's many resources out there that people can access. Obviously, paying attention to what's happening inside your own body and just being aware when things feel that they're not in a good place. Just the awareness that there's something that's not quite working, and being willing to ask for help, or just look to see what resources are out there. There's a wonderful small booklet that's produced by Farm Management Canada called Rooted in Strength. It's a really
Sorry, just to interrupt you. It's Farm Credit Canada.
Oh, sorry, Farm Credit Canada.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rooted in Strength. It's a wonderful booklet, and I think it gives some really great guidance. The National Farmers Union has a page of resources that we collected and consolidated there, to just point people in the right direction. There's some amazing farmer to farmer counseling services that are getting stood up. For example, in Manitoba, we know that there's been some recent efforts there, but it's pretty ad hoc. So I feel like there's some work that we can do there. But I think just understanding immediately that you're not alone, that you're, as the farmer, you're being placed in an impossible situation, between these competing demands of consumer demand and ecological crises, and cost pressures and all sorts of other factors, that you are not alone, that there are 58% of farmers meet the criteria for is it anxiety, and 35% meet the criteria for depression.
Yeah.
Now, I took a look around, and it looks like the Canadian average is around 7% depression. So farmers are, what is that, 5 times more likely to suffer from depression than average Canadians. Average. I feel like there is a crisis here that is very important to acknowledge in our farming community, and that it's going to take people stepping forward and having this conversation to make those adjustments, and to help people feel like it's okay for them to ask for help. yeah, I just encourage people to reach out if they feel like they need that help, and there are some great resources out
Yeah,
there.
I love what you said. It's okay to reach out for help. The other
Mhm.
piece certainly that I that I need to be cognizant of is the self-awareness piece, to
Yeah.
understand when my mood is slipping. And I'll tell you,
Mhm.
January is the absolute worst month of the year for me. Today the sun is shining, but it's been dark and dreary, and so I need to be aware and I need to take those steps. And I really like the piece you said about the Farm Credit Canada
Yeah.
book, Rooted in Strength. It has in
Yeah.
the middle of the booklet is a dashboard
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's real quick and simple to go, holy Toledo, I might be having some issues here and I should deal with them. And
Yeah.
so go talk to someone. Don't be shy about talking about it, and understand you're not alone. And it's okay not to be okay. I'm kind of
Yeah.
slipping into my closing comments here, but
Yeah. It's
really
good.
you hit on all those points, Brooke, and I really appreciate that. So
Yeah. Thank you
thanks
so
for your
much.
time. Really love your passion. Love chatting with you, and I look forward to having more conversations in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and congratulations on the good work you're doing in Manitoba. And look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, to our viewers, thank you for joining us today. Again, you can go to ruralmentalwellness.com and you will see this video there, along with other interviews that have been done, particularly with the rural community. And so, just as we close off here, to everybody, stay well, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.